What happens when the eyes see only gold, and the heart forgets its voice? When a carefully laid plan promises luxury beyond dreams, but the cost is the very soul that planned it. Could a quick, silent compromise in the heat of ambition ever truly be worth the long, bitter silence that follows? In the ancient, vibrant city of Port Harcourt, where the river Niger whispers old secrets to the sea, a choice was made, setting a young woman on a path she believed led to freedom. This path, however, was treacherous, paved not with riches, but with the sharp stones of consequence. She thought she was only risking a few lonely nights. The stakes were far higher, the loss of peace, the shattering of a family, and a debt to the universe that demanded immediate payment. This isn't just a story about a greedy marriage. It's a story about the distance between wanting a life and truly earning it. Before her name became a cautionary tale whispered in the market, there was Cynthia. A young woman with a smile that could charm kings and a hunger that would devour her. Welcome to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every truth demands to be heard. Now, before we begin, where in the world are you watching from? Is it morning in Lagos, evening in Nairobi, or midnight in London? Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Now, lean in. Because this isn't just about what happened, it's about what it means to be truly wealthy. The dry season sun beat down on the corrugated iron roofs of Cynthia's family home in Ajigona, baking the ambition right out of her. It was a life of heat, noise, and never enough food, never enough silence, and certainly never enough money. Her mother, a woman whose face was a map of worries, had spent her life praying for a miracle. Cynthia decided to engineer her own. She had the looks, the grace, and the fierce, unblinking determination of a predator sighting its prey. The prey in this case was Mr. George Namdi, a man whose wealth was as vast and silent as the ocean, and whose age was vast and loud, carrying the heavy scent of cigars and old money. George was a widower, lonely and craving a beautiful, young presence to occupy his sprawling, empty mansion on the high hill, a mansion that glittered like a promise in the distance, a word away from the dust of Ajigona. Cynthia understood the transaction perfectly. She would provide youth and beauty, George would provide the world. The only thing not on the table was love, a foolish, distracting emotion she had decided she could live without. She rehearsed her smiles, practiced her gentle deference, and within 3 months of their first meeting at a church fundraiser, where she made sure to stand perfectly in his sight line, she had a diamond ring that felt like a rock of salvation on her finger. The wedding was a spectacle that shut down the city's major roads, a triumphant carnival of silk, champagne, and flashing cameras. Cynthia was a queen, gliding through the ballroom, receiving the silent, envious admiration of 1,000 eyes. Yet, in the midst of the applause, a small, cold knot of unease tightened in her stomach. It was her father, Thomas, a man of simple decency and deep, quiet faith, who stared at her with eyes that saw far past the gown and the jewels. He had tried to stop her, not out of malice, but out of a father's true fear. "My daughter," he had pleaded the night before, his voice thick with sorrow, "a gilded cage is still a cage. Choose love, even in a small hut, over loneliness in a palace." She had dismissed his worries with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand, telling him he understood nothing of the modern world. Now, seeing the deep, honest pain in his gaze, a fleeting, almost instant regret pierced her. It vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the reassuring weight of the diamond ring. She reminded herself of the mansion, the cars, the boundless credit limits. The price was worth it, even if it meant sacrificing the approval of the one man who had loved her without condition. Married life in the George Namdi mansion was a silent movie played out in extravagant settings. George was not cruel, he was simply absent. He worked in his study, dined at a massive table where she was a distant figurehead, and spent his evenings in a private lounge where she was not invited. The mansion felt like a cold, echoing museum, filled with priceless art and utterly devoid of warmth. Cynthia had all the material possessions she had craved: designer clothes piled high, a car and driver permanently on standby, and a bank account that never dwindled. But she was a beautiful ghost in her own life, a trophy wife in a trophy house, finding no joy in the silence, only the chilling realization that she had traded genuine connection for comfortable isolation. She tried filling the void with shopping, with parties for women like her, empty, glittering women who complimented her jewelry but never asked about her soul. The laughter felt brittle, the champagne flat, and the days stretched before her, long and meaningless. The cage her father had warned her about was not made of iron bars, but of pure, suffocating gold. It was during one of her lavish shopping sprees, clutching a purse that cost more than her family's entire annual income, that she saw him. Not George, but a young man, a fellow driver for one of the luxury car services, with kind eyes and a warm, immediate smile. His name was Kenneth, and he treated her not as the Mrs. Namdi, the untouchable, the queen, but as a person, a woman with a mind and a heartbeat. Their conversations began innocently enough, waiting in the driver's lounge, discussing the day's traffic. Soon, there were stolen moments in the quiet corner of a cafe, moments where Cynthia found herself laughing, a genuine, unrestrained laugh she hadn't realized she'd suppressed for months. Kenneth, who worked hard and had little, spoke of his dreams, to open a small but honest logistics business. He saw her, the real her, the Ajigana girl with a fear of poverty, not the marble-sculpted wife of a mogul. The moral line she thought she would never cross now looked dangerously thin, shimmering under the force of genuine human connection. Her heart, long dormant, began to beat wildly for Kenneth, a beat that was both thrilling and terrifying. She realized with chilling clarity that she was in love with a man who could offer her nothing but his good name, and married to a man who offered everything but himself. This reckless, exhilarating feeling became her secret vice, the only true warmth in her cold palace. One evening, George returned home unexpectedly early, his face etched with a sudden, alarming pallor. He summoned Cynthia to his study, a room she rarely entered. He was seated in his high-back leather chair, looking smaller and far older than his years. He told her, in a voice frail and shaking, that his doctor had given him a grim diagnosis, a fast-moving, aggressive illness that left him months, perhaps weeks. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Cynthia's carefully constructed world did not crumble, it transformed. Her first, instinctive thought was not grief, but a flash of wild, breathless relief. The inheritance. It was coming sooner than she thought. She could marry Kenneth, live her real life, and never look back at the dust. The coldness of her own response stunned her, but the promise of freedom and fortune was too loud to ignore. George, unaware of the treacherous calculation behind her sudden, tearful embrace, simply patted her hand, a gesture of weary finality. The stage was set, and the play was about to turn ugly. The weeks that followed were a deceptive calm before the inevitable storm. Cynthia performed the role of the devoted, grief-stricken wife with the theatrical brilliance of a seasoned actress. She brought George his medicines, read to him from his favorite books, and ensured the household staff maintained a respectful, hushed atmosphere. She was patient, diligent, and utterly devoid of genuine affection, yet her outward performance was flawless. George, weakened and weary, found solace in her presence, mistakenly interpreting her attention as devotion. He spoke often of his will, of securing her future, and in one weak moment, confessed how grateful he was that she had brought youth and light back into his final days. Each confession was a hammer blow to the last vestiges of her conscience, yet she swallowed the guilt, rationalizing her actions as a necessary, temporary evil. This waiting game was a heavy cross, but the promised reward was the kingdom. She kept Kenneth at a discreet distance, only allowing quick, tearful phone calls, promising him that soon, their life could finally begin. But the old man's deterioration stalled. Days turned into weeks, and weeks bled into 2 long, agonizing months. George was weak, yes, but stubbornly holding on. Cynthia began to feel the suffocating pressure of the charade. She was trapped in a gilded cage that refused to open, serving a husband who refused to die on schedule. Her patience thinned, her forced smiles grew brittle. She started spending George's money with aggressive abandon, as if daring the universe to deny her. New cars, new jewelry, and a sudden, massive investment into Kenneth's fledgling logistics business, a secret financial infusion she disguised as a loan from a phantom rich aunt. She was building her exit strategy, brick by diamond-encrusted brick. She justified this frantic spending as a down payment on her freedom, a way to occupy the endless, watchful hours. The mansion, once her promised land, now felt like a gilded prison where she was both the jailer and the most desperate inmate, waiting for the final, merciful toll of the bell. Then came the unexpected, cruel twist. One afternoon, George called the family lawyer and Cynthia into the study, his voice surprisingly firm. "I have made my final arrangements," he announced, his eyes fixed on Cynthia. He spoke of his love and his great desire to see her settled. Cynthia's heart pounded, ready for the sweet pronouncement of her new billionaire status. The lawyer cleared his throat and read the clause. "To my beloved wife, Cynthia Namdi, I bequeath the entire estate, wealth, and holdings, on the condition that she remains married to me until my death and is proven to have served as my faithful, devoted wife. Furthermore, to ensure her continued comfort and security, I have arranged a transfer of a significant, but non-controlling, part of my assets to an irrevocable trust for her immediate use, provided she continues to manage the household and remains in residence until the final day." Cynthia felt a sharp, cold panic seize her. The full price was still locked behind the final, unpredictable hurdle. But the lawyer continued, "As a sign of my gratitude to the man who gave me my greatest treasure, I have also transferred a very generous lifelong stipend to a separate, smaller trust fund for my father-in-law, Thomas." Cynthia was furious, but had to plaster a grateful, tear-filled smile onto her face. Her father. Why him? It was a final, frustrating gesture of George's kind but meddling nature. Thomas, a man who lived on a modest pension, now had a secure, independent income, enough to live comfortably without Cynthia's help. The money George had given to Thomas was a moral inconvenience, a final, generous act that made Cynthia's ambition look petty by comparison. She saw the full inheritance as her due, her reward for months of calculated sacrifice, and this trust arrangement felt like a humiliating probation. She maintained her composure in front of the lawyer, offering a moving tribute to her husband's foresight, but inside, a dark calculation was already being made. The waiting was killing her, and now her husband was prolonging his life in an act of baffling, infuriating resilience. She could not wait any longer. Her freedom and the love of Kenneth were a single breath away. The unraveling began subtly, a tiny crack in her perfectly constructed facade. Cynthia began to neglect George's care, allowing the night nurse to shoulder more and more responsibility, inventing excuses for her absence. Then came the chilling escalation. One evening, alone with George, she made a deliberate mistake, subtly altering the dosage of his powerful, fast-acting sedative, telling him it would help him rest better. The effect was immediate and alarming. George slipped into a deep, unresponsive sleep. Cynthia watched him, her heart thudding a sick, desperate rhythm, as the line between impatience and malice blurred and disappeared. The next day, he woke up weaker, barely able to speak. A new, terrifying thought took root, an expedited inheritance. But before she could make another move, before her dark design could fully manifest, the true, unexpected blow fell. She received a panicked, late-night call from Kenneth. His new logistics business, the one she had secretly funded with George's money, had been hit by a disaster. A massive fire in the warehouse, the entire fleet of new trucks destroyed, and the insurance Kenneth had paid for was revealed to be a forgery by a fraudulent agent who had vanished with the premiums. The entire investment, George's money, was gone. Kenneth was devastated, ruined, and facing crushing debt. Cynthia's future, the kingdom she had been building in secret, had been reduced to ashes in a single, fiery night. The swift, silent hand of consequence had begun to move. The news of the disaster shattered Cynthia's composure. All her calculated risk, the months of emotional servitude, the final, dreadful moral compromise, all had been for nothing. The money was gone, and Kenneth, her golden ticket to a new life, was now a liability, drowning in debt she had unwittingly created with George's own funds. She stared at the wreckage of her plan, feeling not grief for Kenneth, but a cold, blinding rage at the universe for this cruel, immediate reversal. She had planned her escape down to the last detail, and karma had used a simple warehouse fire to destroy everything. In her panic, she made a reckless decision. She would accelerate George's rest. She concocted a scenario, mixing a fatal cocktail of his medication, her hands shaking with a terrible mix of fear and conviction. She was driven beyond reason, seeing George not as a man, but as the final, frustrating barrier to a world that was hers, by right of her suffering. She entered George's room late that night, the mansion quiet save for the buzzing of a distant air conditioner. He lay still, his breathing shallow. As she raised the glass to his lips, ready to administer the lethal dose, a sound stopped her cold. It was the faint, unmistakable sound of a key turning in the front door lock, followed by the quiet, heavy footsteps of an unexpected visitor. Fear, sharp and primal, replaced the murderous rage. She dropped the glass, the liquid splashing silently onto the expensive Persian rug. She quickly cleaned up the mess and rushed out, trying to appear as if she had simply been checking on her husband. Standing in the foyer, looking tired and drawn, was Thomas, her father. He carried a small overnight bag. "Cynthia," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "I am here. George called me earlier. He is very weak. He asked me to come and stay, to look after him for a few days. He said he needed a man of faith." Thomas settled in, a quiet, watchful presence in the overly luxurious home. His very presence, a simple, honest man in a palace of deception, felt like a spiritual floodlight. He took a room near George's, and with gentle but unwavering resolve, he took over the primary care. He changed George's bedsheets, spoke softly to him, and read him psalms in a deep, reassuring voice. He was meticulous about the medication schedule, even asking Cynthia to double-check the dosages with him. Cynthia was cornered. Her window of opportunity had slammed shut. She couldn't act with her father, the man whose honest eyes were her biggest condemnation, watching her every move. The pressure was unbearable, her greed now twisted into a knot of murderous frustration. She started spending all her time in her room, avoiding Thomas, avoiding George, avoiding the cold mirror of her own reflection. She was a hair's breadth away from a horrible crime, and her own father had become her unintentional protector. Then, 2 days after Thomas arrived, George's breathing became ragged. A doctor was summoned. The end was near. Cynthia stood in the hallway, an empty, desolate feeling consuming her. The goal was within reach, but the price, the sheer moral weight of her actions, had become too heavy. She had lost the love of Kenneth, now gone to face his debts, she had alienated her only family, and she had almost committed murder. She felt a desperate, choking need for absolution. She walked into George's room one last time, where Thomas sat holding George's hand. George opened his eyes, recognizing her. He managed a single, wheezing sentence, his last words, "Cynthia, be well. Choose rightly." Then, he was gone. George Namdi was finally dead. Cynthia stood over him, not triumphant, but utterly ruined. The money was hers, finally. But the victory tasted like ash. The will was read a week later. Cynthia inherited everything. The mansion, the vast fortune, the empire. But the final, crushing blow of karma was not in the money, it was in the emptiness. As she stood in the silence of the echoing, lonely mansion, a feeling of deep, bone-weary despair washed over her. She realized the money hadn't bought her happiness, it had only amplified her isolation. She had lost the warmth of Kenneth and the respect of her father for a price that was nothing more than an empty, golden shell. Later that day, she received a letter from Thomas. It was brief. He thanked her for her late husband's generosity, but informed her that he was giving the entire stipend to a charity for homeless children in Ajigona. I have enough, he wrote simply. The greatest wealth is a clear conscience. Cynthia looked around the mansion, her heart heavy, and realized Thomas was the only one who had truly inherited anything of value. She was the wealthiest woman in the city, but she was bankrupt of soul. The money had come, but it was too late. The one thing she truly craved, a clean start with a clear heart, was the one thing the millions could never buy back. Cynthia never became the carefree, happy woman she had envisioned. But 5 years later, having sold the mansion and quietly liquidated much of the fortune, she was not penniless. She spent the rest of her life discreetly funding small businesses for honest, struggling young people like Kenneth once was. Her fortune had become her penance. Not because she ever felt entitled to a reward, but because she chose, in the end, to use the ill-gotten wealth to serve the good she had betrayed. And a heart that chooses honest work over easy luxury, service over selfishness, and humility over pride, will always find its way back to the light. If this story moved you, hit like, share it, and tell me in the comments, what would you choose, wealth without love, or love without wealth? Subscribe to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every choice carries a lesson. This is Stories by the King, where truth heals, and courage finds its home.